Let's talk about election interference and executive orders. This is going to be a long one, but it's important, so sit down and buckle up. As many of you know, the SAVE Act recently passed the House, and the Senate is expected to vote on it within the next week. If you don't know what the SAVE Act is, I have another video on it, but the short version is that it's an attempt to use the pretext of election security to implement voter ID laws that allow the Trump administration to selectively enforce voter security in areas they want to suppress, as well as to place barriers to entry for women, people of color, and low-income individuals to vote. As of me filming this, they currently don't have enough votes in the Senate to break a filibuster, so that's good. Of course, the Trump administration is not stopping there. According to a recent article by the Washington Post, Trump and his team are circulating a legal draft of an executive order intended to use the specter of foreign election interference as an excuse for Trump to declare a national security emergency and twist the wording of several laws that give the president emergency powers in order for him to basically block any use of electronic voting machines or mail-in voting in future elections, as well as to require all voters to re-register before the next election with proof of citizenship. To say this would be the worst threat to democracy the U.S. has ever faced is no understatement. For a legislative body like Congress to pass the SAVE Act is bad enough, but for the president to do the same thing by executive order, unilaterally controlling the very process that gives them power, is nothing short of autocracy and cannot be allowed to happen in the United States. Now, we don't have the actual draft being circulated, but we do have some information on it from the Washington Post, as well as from one of Trump's lawyers who is behind the draft, Peter Ticktin, who shared a memo about it on Democracy Docket explaining part of the reasoning. Here's what we know. First, the draft cites at least 4 laws that give the president special powers during an emergency. The Defense Production Act of 1950, the National Emergencies Act of 1976, the Federal Information Security Modernization Act of 2014, and the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, which you may recall is the same act involved in the recent tariff strike down by the Supreme Court. Second, the draft interprets certain parts of those laws that allow the president to declare a national emergency to address election interference much more broadly than those laws actually allow, which is to basically say that there is very strong and specific evidence required for election interference to be used as an excuse, not just the blatant statements the Trump administration is making that have already been disproven multiple times in courts, including in courts in Republican areas with Trump-appointed judges. As a side note, I wouldn't be surprised if certain foreign countries are allowed to create some pretext for election interference in the next few months so that the Trump administration can point to that as justification, so that's something to keep an eye out for. And third, the draft attempts to manipulate certain text in those laws which give the president the ability to seize or regulate certain foreign goods during an emergency as a pretext to seize or regulate the election apparatus, which is wholly owned and controlled by the United States. This is the crux of the whole draft, so, as Bernie says, let's be clear on the matter. Nothing in these laws gives the president anything remotely close to the ability to control elections. In fact, the text of at least one of the laws, the IEEPA, specifically excludes postal communications such as the mail-in ballots from things the president can regulate. And in all cases, the regulatory power granted to the president is directed outward to the foreign entity, not inward, and in many cases explicitly requires armed hostilities, aka war, for the powers to activate. Which, on another note, makes it very interesting that the Trump administration is about to start a war in Iran. So, to bring it all together, the Trump administration is preparing to overrule Congress's failure to pass the SAVE Act by issuing an executive order that A, relies on twisted interpretation of a jumble of laws that date back to the 50s, to B, declare a national security emergency based on a pretext that does not exist, in order to C, grant the president emergency powers that the laws in question don't grant him, and in some cases explicitly prohibit, in order to D, give him the power to manipulate the very elections that grant him power in the first place. This is it, people. This is the culmination of 60 years of work by Republicans, starting with the fall of Nixon and ending with Trump, to weaken and destroy any semblance of democracy in the United States and to effectively reverse the civil rights and voting rights acts of the 1960s. If we allow this executive order to take effect, there will be no more democracy in the United States. We cannot sit in our houses and wait for the perfect moment to protest, for someone else to act first, for our supposed leaders to do something any longer. We, the people, are the ultimate source from which any democracy draws its power, and this is our last chance to act with anything that even remotely resembles peace to protect that democracy. We need to protest, we need civil disobedience, and we must strike. If we do not take this opportunity now, the only path left to us will be despotism or civil war. There will be no more chances.